That moment didn't erase my pain. Nothing about grief works that way. There was no sudden relief, no dramatic sense of closure. It was like a crack in a sealed room, letting in just enough air to remind me I wasn't suffocating alone. In the days that followed, my neighbor didn't change overnight into a savior figure. They didn't hover or insert themselves aggressively into my life. Instead, there was consistency, a quiet check-in, a shared cup of tea, a simple question asked without pressure. What surprised me most was what they didn't do. They didn't try to fix my grief. They didn't rush me toward acceptance or positivity. They didn't tell me everything would be okay. They seemed to understand that grief isn't a problem to be solved, but an experience to be carried. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Some days we sat in silence, the kind that doesn't demand anything. Other days we spoke about ordinary things: weather, work, random memories. Those normal conversations mattered more than I expected. They reminded me that life still existed outside my pain. Their presence gave my days a gentle rhythm, a reason to sit at the table instead of the floor, a reason to notice time passing again. These weren't grand gestures, but they were grounding. They gave my grief a place to rest instead of letting it roam freely inside me. Slowly, the weight I carried began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it redistributed. It no longer pressed entirely on my chest. Some of it was held in shared moments, in quiet understanding. I learned that grief feels heavier when it's unacknowledged. There is something powerful about being allowed to grieve without being managed. My neighbor didn't monitor my progress or expect improvement. They didn't measure healing in visible milestones. They simply stayed present, trusting that healing has its own timeline. That presence challenged everything I thought I knew about support. I had believed help came in the form of solutions, advice, or emotional speeches. Instead, help arrived as patience, as showing up without expectations, as allowing me to be exactly where I was. As weeks passed, I began to notice how rare this kind of support actually is. Not because people don't care, but because modern life doesn't make space for it. We are busy, distracted, stretched thin. We are taught to move quickly past discomfort. Grief makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't follow schedules. It lingers, it resurfaces, it interrupts productivity. In a society that values efficiency, grief feels inconvenient, so it's often ignored, minimized, or rushed. Studies now show what many people feel intuitively. Chronic loneliness has serious health consequences. It increases the risk of depression, anxiety, heart disease, and even early mortality. Yet loneliness remains one of the most overlooked public health issues of our time. What makes loneliness particularly dangerous is how invisible it can be. People can appear functional, social, even successful, while feeling deeply isolated. Grief intensifies that isolation by separating inner experience from outward appearance. Cities are full of people, but not always connection. We live in crowded buildings, commute alongside strangers, and communicate digitally, yet still feel unseen. Physical proximity has replaced emotional closeness in many parts of modern life. Digital communities offer constant interaction, but often lack depth. We scroll through updates, tragedies, and personal losses with a quick tap of sympathy before moving on. Pain becomes content, consumed briefly, and forgotten just as quickly. In that environment, it's easy to assume someone else will help. Someone closer, someone more qualified, someone with more time. Responsibility becomes diluted, and compassion becomes passive. My story isn't unique because grief is universal. What makes it stand out is the interruption of that pattern. One person noticed. One person chose not to look away. One person acted without needing permission. That choice had ripple effects. It didn't just affect my grief. It changed how I saw people. I became more aware of the quiet signs of struggle in others. The missed meals, the tired eyes, the subtle withdrawal. I began to understand how often people are suffering silently, hoping someone will notice without having to ask. Asking for help is hard, especially in cultures that value self-reliance and emotional restraint. Many people don't speak up because they fear being a burden. Others don't know how to articulate what they're feeling. Some don't even realize how much they're struggling until someone reflects it back to them. This is where presence matters most. Not dramatic intervention, not forced conversations, just noticing patterns, staying curious, being willing to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. My neighbor didn't need training or special insight to help me. They didn't have perfect words. They simply paid attention. That attention was enough to shift my experience of grief from isolation to shared humanity. Modern society often frames healing as an individual responsibility. We are told to cope better, think positively, and seek professional help if needed. While those tools matter, they don't replace human connection. Healing happens in relationships, even small ones. It happens when pain is acknowledged rather than dismissed. When someone says, without words, you don't have to go through this alone, the danger of overlooking grief isn't just emotional, it's social. When people feel unseen for too long, they withdraw further. Isolation deepens, communities weaken, empathy erodes. I realized how easily my story could have gone differently. If my neighbor hadn't knocked, if they had assumed I was fine, if they had stayed within the safe boundaries of polite distance. That realization stays with me. It reminds me how thin the line can be between coping and collapsing, how small actions can carry disproportionate weight in moments of vulnerability. We don't need to fix each other's pain to make a difference. We need to notice it. We need to resist the urge to look away just because something makes us uncomfortable. Grief will always exist. Loss is part of being human. But loneliness doesn't have to be. Not if we are willing to slow down, pay attention, and show up in simple ways. What I learned through this experience is that healing often begins quietly, not with answers, but with awareness. Not with solutions, but with presence. One ordinary person choosing to notice can change everything.